G'day everybody, how you going? Good to see you here. Let's just make sure that we are in fact live on the Facebook. I'll just start logging to my Facebook as well. Let's have a look. Yeah, I'm here. This is great. This is great. All right, guys, thanks for joining me today. Feel free to ask any questions in the comments, and that way I can help answer them for you. Today, we're just going to just quickly go over panoramas again, not the same stuff that I did a couple of weeks back, but we had a couple of inquiries during the week regarding vertical panoramas, just a few queries regarding that. So I thought what we'd do is just touch base with that again, just to help cover off those issues that people might have. You know, you might have sussed it out that stitching panoramas horizontally can work for you, but what do you do when you go about shooting them vertically? Let's just have a look at one that I did here. So this was the single frame. This is my Wilson's prom shoot that I did several months ago, right? So this is the single frame, but then I haven't got a particularly wide angle lens and I wanted more in the foreground. So just scrolling across one, I then pointed the camera downwards, still with a vertical frame to get more of this foreground, and then pointed the camera upwards, and you'll see that I've got an overlap. If I just go back to this first one here, I've got an overlap where I've got those bushes in the shot. And then when I stitched them together, I ended up with a more panoramic vertical image, just like you see there. And so that can work where you can stitch two vertical pictures together to get your panorama to be higher or longer. But you can also stitch them horizontally, and this is what the person during the week was inquiring about. So welcome to Tuesday's tip. We do this every Tuesday 10 a.m. in Tom's Tribe. This one here, I've now taken the camera from portrait mode to landscape mode, and I've pointed the camera downwards. And so what we're now going to do is take a series of shots that are horizontal in nature, but then we're panning upwards to create a vertical panorama like that. Okay? So just to go back a section, here, all of the settings are always the same, as you know. So 1/60th of a second handheld at f16, ISO 200, okay? And the critical thing about shooting panoramas this way is that you do need to change the focus. Unlike a horizontal panorama, one that you do, you know, say left to right or right to left, you would focus here on the bushes at f16. That would mean this foreground is in focus and everything else in the background is in focus as well. And as you pan across the image right to left or left to right, here we've gone one frame to the right, you don't change the focus because we still want this foreground to be in focus here, this background to be in focus there, etc., etc. Do you get my drift? In this case, because we're panning down towards our feet and then panning upwards, particularly if the background is well off in the distance, we do need to change the focus. So in this case, I focused on the bushes here, okay? But as we pan upwards, we're going to probably then focus a little bit beyond this first bush here in this bush here, okay? Just to drift the focus back a little to ensure the foreground is in focus as well as the background. And then as we pan up again, I don't want to be focused on that bush in the foreground here because that's now disappearing out of the frame. I will now focus here. Generally speaking, with a landscape using a wide angle lens, you focus about 1/3 up from the bottom of the frame. So 1/3 up from the bottom of the frame is about here. And if we focus just on this section here, we will then see that all of this in the foreground is in focus, as well as this in the background. And as we pan up, we change the focus to be here now. And that's 5-6 meters away. And at f16, with a wide angle lens, everything will be in focus, okay? And then we've stitched that together to create this image. Do you get what I'm saying? So it is critical that you change the focus when doing a vertical stitch using horizontal frames. I hope that makes sense, yeah? That's the idea. Same as any other panorama, you've got to keep the exposure on the same. Okay, don't go changing the exposure. Don't have it on a semi-auto mode or an auto mode. You've got to have it on manual, and you've got to keep the same exposure throughout the whole image. And of course, just like you would with any other panorama, don't start with your exposure and take your meter reading, exposure reading from this point here, because this is the darkest part of the image. And if you do take the exposure reading there, by the time you pan up here to a brighter part of the image, you've probably blown out the highlights. Okay, so as I always do, assess the panorama. This is my panorama, and say, right, what's the brightest part of the image? Okay, this dune, so I need to get the exposure correct for this dune first, okay? Set the exposure, which is a 60th of a second at f16, ISO 200, and then point the camera downwards and start with your panorama. Now you can go from top to bottom or bottom to top. I'm always used to starting at the bottom, including the foreground, and panning upwards. And once we've done that, what we would then do is just process this image as we would any other photograph. There's a bit too much sky in this shot here, so I'm going to change that. I'm going to just crop that out. Are there any questions? Just put them in the comments just so I can help answer them. You don't have to keep a specific ratio. It doesn't have to be 3:1. It could be 2:1. It can be whatever you like. You're just cropping according to what you think is going to look good. Okay, of course you're cropping in on pixels, so you won't end up with the largest file size that you need. But in hindsight, what I probably should have done is pointed the camera down even lower to get more of this foreground. But I know why I didn't, because we've got a shadow falling over the foreground there, so there wasn't much point. Okay, but I could have, if the sun had been out more on this foreground, I would have pointed the camera down even more to get more of these beautiful vertical lines that are coming up from the bottom of the frame there. Okay, and again, just processing this image as you would any other photograph. What we would do here is probably just, well, there's a little bit of an auto correction that's gone on here, it seems. So Lightroom has already added some vibrance, taken away a little bit in the highlights. Okay, just played a little bit with the shadows, whites, etc., etc. Maybe a little bit of texture just to add that element there. There's some dust bunnies here, and just like we've seen before, we can click visualize spots. We can change this threshold here to reveal more of those dust bunnies if we like, but we can just click on these to get rid of them, because no one likes dust bunnies in their photographs. Yes, I'm in Lightroom, Elaine. Yep. So let me show you. Sorry, I haven't stitched the panorama in Lightroom, so let me just go back a step and do that for you, because I'm just working on an image that has already been stitched. So let me just jump back a step. Sorry, I didn't include that. It was like, here's one I prepared earlier type thing. So let me just go and do that again for you. So just waiting for my Lightroom to catch up. It's a bit slow on a Tuesday, hasn't had its coffee, so catch up Lightroom, come on. Okay, let's just press G on the keyboard, takes us back to this grid view, and we can just click on this first image here, which is the one down the bottom. Click on the last image, which is the top one here. Okay, photo merge here, panorama, okay. So Jeff's just asked, if I was shooting, say, a 9-image pano, a 3x3, would I recommend changing the focus on each row? Yes. Yep. 100%. Same thing. So if you're pointing the camera downwards, you'd have to change the focus and pan upwards, and then you'd move across to, say, the right. You'd point the camera downwards, and you'd, again, change the focus. If it was me and I was doing like a grid view, a 3x3, I'd start in the bottom left-hand corner. I would take, say 3 shots migrating upwards, and then I'd move to the right in the sky and do the middle row and then go downwards, and then I'd move across to the final row on the right hand side and go from the bottom upwards. Do you see what I mean? So I'm doing a snake pattern, so to speak, and that way I'm minimizing the amount of times I'm changing that focus, etc. But it just makes sense. It doesn't matter what order you shoot the photos in, yeah? So it doesn't matter what order you shoot the photos in, Lightroom works it out. Its algorithm finds the overlap and stitches it together that way. I'm glad we've done this, and thank you, Elaine, for pointing this out. Whilst spherical projection works very well for most panoramas that you do horizontally, I find that you need to choose a different projection for these horizontal pictures that you're stitching vertically. And more often than not, it is this perspective, okay? So while spherical works well for the horizontal, perspective projection works better for these vertical panos, okay? You can see there that, just have a look at the difference. That's kind of like fat and wide. It's been stretched in the spherical projection. You've seen that one there. That's got like a bowing of the of the image, particularly in the middle. These shadows aren't straight, so that's really off. But the perspective one, although it stretched that sky quite high, it certainly kept the distortion under control. And that's why we've then clicked merge here and ended up with this picture, and then cropped the sky out, as I said, in order to just not have as much sky and have the picture be more balanced, okay? And it is a slightly different photograph than just a single shot, because a single shot was more like this, yeah? Whereas my panorama has more in it, okay? Of course, we're using panoramas because we want to include more in the photograph. We're not able to get it in that traditional 3:2 ratio. We want to have something more like a 2:1 or a 3:1. We want the picture to be wider than a traditional picture, or we want it to be taller than a traditional picture. So we end up using this technique in order to create that effect. And look, I did it with the drone as well. Let me just quickly just show you whilst we're here. Yep, here. So this frame here, let me just see, are these in order? Capture time, yes, ching ching. Yeah, it's these ones. I'm just getting my orientation, so to speak. It looks like this one is the one pointing downwards, and then we've got that next one up, and then we're migrating upwards to this one here, to the sky, so to speak. I think these frames are part of it as well. I haven't done it in any specific order, which makes it difficult for me to show you what I've done, but you'll see that in the end what we've done is stitch these horizontal frames together to end up with this vertical pano using the drone. So it's possible to do that as well. You can't turn the cameras on the drone vertically, not on my model. You used to be able to do it on the Mavic Pro, no, the one before the Mavic Pro, something else, I forget the name of it. But they just have it as a horizontal orientation these days. So you can see how I've pointed the camera right downwards to get this bottom part, and then just easily, those who own a drone know what I'm talking about, you can easily just click on the toggle there and it just moves the camera upwards and downwards, however you like, and it's very easy to do so long as you've got enough overlap. And we've ended up with a drone photo here that's a beautiful panoramic vertical orientation, and of course the benefit of doing that is to provide that perspective, but also to, particularly with the drone shot, it's nice to have a larger file size, because we're always needing more megapixels with our drones because they're just not up to task. I've got the, was it the Mavic Air? It might have been the Mavic Air that had that, had the ability to switch your camera from horizontal to vertical, which I loved, and I wish they kept it, because more often than not, you're wanting to stitch your panoramas, regardless of whether you're on the ground or with a drone, in a vertical orientation and go side to side horizontally. Hope that makes sense. This one here, it just looks like it needs a little bit more in the, it looks like it's a little bit bowed in the middle. So if we go here to manual, you see the distortion is accentuating that bowing. But then this here, where I just pull it a little, actually it's pretty good anyway. It's just the perspective. If I pull this too far this way, which I think corrects this part here, look at what it's doing to the horizon. I don't want to bend that horizon the way it is. So if I just double click on the word amount, if you double click on any of the words in Lightroom here, it always just takes the sliders back to the middle. You may not know that, but rather than trying to take this back to 0, you can just double click on the word and it takes it back to 0. It's the same with the gradient filter. Whenever you open the gradient filter, sometimes, you know, for whatever reason, all of these sliders are all over the place, right? And you're like, oh, I don't want to have to go and every time I open the gradient filter, adjust each of these sliders. If you just double click on the word effect, this is inside of the gradient filter here. If you double click on the word effect, do you see what's happened? It's taken all of my sliders back to 0. And then I can just say, right, I just want to darken the exposure, drag a gradient over the sky there. And the question we had regarding the gradient just during the week was, what is that affecting? Well, as you can see there, I've put the mask on, which is down in the bottom toolbar here. If you can't see that toolbar, just go to View, Show Toolbar. I've obviously got it showing now, so that's the opposite. It's going to want to hide it. I won't click on that, but you'll see that the greatest effect with the exposure, just darkening it, is from the the black dot upwards, but then it graduates, it disappears, and it disappears to nothing by the time it hits that bottom line here. Okay, do you see that? So you can change the effect and where it changes. You can, obviously, the more you scissor this out, the more it affects, but also too, the graduation extends further over the image. Whereas if you bring it in closer, you'll see that graduation happens a lot quicker across the frame. So that's really up to you where you have it. And if you click on that black dot, you can move this gradient filter up and down, left and right, however you like. Does that make sense? Click done on that, and you'll just see that would have just darkened the top of the image there just slightly. Okay, along with everything else I've done there. So look, I hope that helps, guys. Feel free to ask any questions after finished going live, just in the comments there, and just also too, for those who are interested about any future tips on a Tuesday at 10 a.m, just let me know just by putting it in as a comment or a post inside of the tribe. Just hashtag Tuesday tip. So hashtag Tuesday tip, and that way I'll just keep a list of all the things that you're wanting to cover off. I know somebody mentioned during the week about converting images to black and white in Lightroom, so we'll cover that off next Tuesday, okay? Converting images to black and white. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that today, and hope you got something from that, and look forward to catching up with you next week. Cheers, guys. Bye.